Reclaim is a podcast for women, by women, on conversations that matter, with your host, Thais Sky. Together, we will explore the questions of what does it look like to reclaim our sovereignty, our worthiness, our voices as women in this messy world. No topics are barred as we offer roundtable discussions on life, spirituality, politics, and what it means to be a woman in the modern age. Let's do this. Hello. Thais Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim, the podcast where we have conversations that matter. I am your host, and I'm sitting here in my closet in Los Angeles, California. I am thrilled to be here with you. If you're tuning in for the first time, I release a new podcast episode every Tuesday morning. And this morning, I have the honor and privilege to share with you a conversation that I had with Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I've shared her work with you all before. Elizabeth does these daily resistance lives where she dissects what's going on in the political world in a way that is tangible, in a way that is understandable for us commoners, so that we can know how to take action and how to be aware of what's going on with the Trump administration. So stay tuned, because this interview that I share or that I have with her and I'm sharing with you now is going to be really, really juicy. But first, I am going to be speaking at McKenna Held's event at the end of the month that I want to invite you to. If you have not heard, I'm speaking at her Your Leadership Recipe live event that's going on March 28th and 29th. It's happening in Macon, Georgia. And this is going to be a conference where we're going to have conversations about social justice and leadership and entrepreneurship and how we can really take up space. So that's what I'm going to be talking about anyway, how to take up space without taking up other people's space. So all the information for that is in the show notes, and you can learn more about the event. She's doing some pretty cool, awesome things that I haven't seen in other conferences. This is going to be a really unique experience, and I hope that you join us in Georgia at the end of the month. It's not too late to book that trip. It's going to be life-changing. Okay, also, I have some big news to share with you all today. As many of you know, I'm a women's leadership coach, and I've been coaching women since 2010, doing it full-time since June 2015. So I've been coaching for a long time, and I love it. I love this work. I love exploring deeper emotional wounds with women who come and do one-on-one work with me. I love teaching women how to know, trust, and express themselves unapologetically. Much of what I do feels like a deep karmic honoring. And because I love what I do so much, I want to be good at it. No, rewind. I want to be amazing at it. This is my mastery, and I take it very seriously. I practice a lot of integrity in my work, and I want to be damn good at it. Again, not good. I want to be extremely fantastic at it. So I've made the decision to go back to school. I got accepted into a graduate program here in Los Angeles where I'm going to be getting my master's in clinical psychology, and I'm going to deepen my knowledge and my understanding of psychology so I can bring even greater tools to my one-on-one work. Yay! This is a big deal. I'm so thrilled. This is going to be the best adventure of my life. Now, what does that mean for you? Nothing. What does that mean for Reclaim? Nothing. Nothing is changing. I'm going to be setting up some systems on the back end that will give me some more time to focus on my studies. But in terms of my offerings, in terms of what I'm doing, nothing is changing. And if anything changes in the future, you will all be the first to know. So as I shared last week, I have 2 spots available for one-on-one coaching. My calendar is starting to book up with clarity calls. So if you are interested in doing one-on-one work with me, I invite you to sign up to get on a call with me. I require everyone who does one-on-one work with me to get on a call with me. I want to feel out our energy. I want to make sure that everything's copacetic before bringing you on board. So the one-on-one work I do is for courageous women who want to experience their own softening. They want to address their worthiness wound once and for all. They want to break free from the limiting beliefs that are keeping them stuck in overwhelm, doubt, comparitis. I'm here to offer radical transformation, the kind that leaves you reborn, standing freely and whole, glimmering alive in your spiritual power. So if you're interested in learning more, the link is in the show notes and you can book our call there. And I'm excited to welcome you in to our one-on-one work together. One more thing before I bring on Elizabeth. So having been accepted to this master's program, I've been thinking a lot about this podcast and a lot about the conversations that I've had. And something that has been more and more clear to me is how important this conversation is. Finding the intersection of spirituality and feminism is so needed because too often we see one without the other. We see the conversations of feminism and activism and social justice without the lens of truly understanding our oneness. And then we often see in the spiritual conversations our fast excitement at getting to the place of oneness without respecting and honoring each other's differences and using the conversations of oneness to actually awaken humanity. And as I've been more getting in tune with myself, getting in tune with my purpose, understanding my what I'm here to do on this planet, one thing is clear. I want to continue to have these important conversations. They matter to me. They matter to our society. And I believe that it is in this intersection of spirituality and feminism that we will find radical healing, not only on a personal level, but on a cultural level and also on a global level. And so I'm honored that you're here. I'm honored that you're listening to the podcast. I'm honored that you too are finding this conversation to be important. And the best way that you can support me in this work is to leave a review and share this podcast. Okay. Leave a review on my iTunes page. It means the world. It affects the algorithms. It gets more people seeing this podcast. It doesn't have to be this long, convoluted thing. But if you can just take a moment to leave a review, it would mean the world. And then two, share this podcast with the people that you think need to hear this conversation. Not only this conversation I'm going to have with Elizabeth, but all my previous 20-some episodes that I've shared. This work can change mountains. I truly believe that. I'm so proud of this podcast. I'm so proud of the lines that are getting blurred between these two realms. I think bringing them together is critical. So I'm happy that you're here. Thank you for doing what you do to support this podcast. And let's talk about Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin, peepos. Okay, so let me read to you Elizabeth's bio. Described as a celebrated career coach and fearless entrepreneur, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin is the CEO of the Gaia Project Consulting, LLC, and the founder of the Gaia Project for Women's Leadership. Elizabeth has a storied track record of success as a Wall Street lawyer, serial CEO and entrepreneur, and high-powered executive coach. After a 15-year career as a full-time Wall Street securities litigator and trial lawyer, Elizabeth founded Gaia Project Consulting, an executive consulting and coaching firm that serves senior executives across tech, finance, banking, law, fashion, healthcare, nonprofit, and consulting, propelling its clients to new heights of growth and professional alignment. What she doesn't share in her bio is that Elizabeth runs these daily Resistance Lives videos that really engage in important conversations around bringing the political into the personal and how we can navigate the Trump administration without losing hope. So you can learn more about her daily Resistance Lives on the show notes. It takes you to her platform where you can listen in to her daily videos, and I highly recommend her work. Now, something that Elizabeth is doing right now is she is raising money for the Alexis P. Morgan Fellowship. This is a fellowship that she has created for emerging voices of color. So let me read to you the GoFundMe a little bit here. Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin of Resistance Live has set up this GoFundMe as an inaugural effort to support brilliant emerging women voices of color. This year, we honor Alexis P. Morgan, for whom the fellowship will be named. You can learn more about the GoFundMe. Again, link is in the show notes. Alexis Morgan is someone that I cherish deeply. She will also be at the Recipe Leadership Live event in Macon, Georgia. You can learn more about Alexis's work, again, using the link in the show notes. If you have money, please consider donating to this very important foundation. Okay, so as you're listening to this conversation with Elizabeth, I invite you to think about your relationship with politics. How active are you in politics? Are you active in local and state politics? Are you active in speaking to your congressmen or women? Why or why not? What is your relationship with politics? Do you feel that it's predominantly a negative thing that you don't engage in, but you only vote once every 4 years? Why? Why? Let's start to look at our relationship with government, because what we can have seen again and again and again is that government only listens to the people when we are noisy enough. And so your participation is crucial to our democracy. So where you don't participate, where you feel like it's too complicated, or you're not going to make a difference, or it's all corrupt anyway, so you're not even going to pay attention, that is not helpful. So I want you to look at those places that reside within you. Listen to this conversation with Elizabeth. And at the end of this podcast, let's do something different. Let's do something different. Hi, Elizabeth. Welcome to Reclaim.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I hear your voice every day, so it's kind of fun that I now get to actually speak to you and interview you. We're going to get into some really, really good topics because I know you have such brilliant wisdom that you share every day through your resistant lives, and I know that many people are thinking these things. So I'm excited to get into your brain a little bit today.
Great. I'm right here and ready to have it picked.
So tell me, okay, so when you started your resistance lives, you shared this pretty openly that your platform was pretty normal, right? It had like about 1,000 people as, Facebook friends. And now you're over 40,000 in about a year. So I would love to know, what has that growth been like behind the scenes?
Yeah, it's interesting because I do feel as though structurally our company was prepared for this without knowing that in a weird sort of way. We've been around now for about 7.5, almost 8 years. And so obviously we've been building a platform for quite some time, but it had been separate from my personal platforms. And so when Resistance Live started, as you said, it was really just an opportunity for me to riff on politics to my friends. And indeed, the suggestion that was made to me by Amanda Steinberg, who's a really dear friend of mine, also an entrepreneur, was just hit the Facebook Live button because that way you won't have to type everything. And I had been riffing on politics, for all through the 2016 election, very big Hillary supporter, and then got much more into resistance-oriented action items after the election. And obviously hit the Facebook Live button and really had a tap, 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 is this thing on moment kind of at the start. But what I didn't realize at the time was that within about a week or two of just starting to do that daily, and it didn't have a name, and it was just me kind of recording whenever I felt like it, someone shared it in the original Pantsuit Nation group. And that at that point, I think was like 3.5 million people, and we were kind of off to the races from there. It's been a very unexpected ride, to be honest, and it's had some very significant impacts on what we've done as a business, because very quickly with that kind of growth, the support that you need, it becomes obvious. We strive, for instance, very hard to keep our entire feed free from trolls and bots, and there are days where that takes hours and hours of effort by my social media director to keep it preserved. But I had a social media director before this all started, which is more than I think a lot of people can say. And so in some sense, the business side of it has been a big adjustment, but not a grating one. The personal adjustment is something a little bit different because while I had something of a public profile before now, I had appeared on CNN talking about equal pay issues, and I'd done a fair amount of major media, and then also had done a lot of media in my earlier days as a lawyer because I worked on so many high profile matters. I was not prepared for, I guess, the degree of public exposure that comes with something this viral. And so that aspect of it has been really interesting. And it's been interesting from a sociological and a cultural perspective, as well as just an internal one. For instance, people critique my appearance all the time now, which is interesting in and of itself. I often find that on the days where a lot of trolls show up on a broadcast, more often than not, the first target of abuse is, some aspect of my physical appearance, my body, my hair, whether my sweater has hair on it that day,
Wow.
my boobs, and that's an interesting thing. It's especially interesting just from the standpoint of considering how glad I am that I've done a lot of work on myself through my whole life so that I don't actually take it personally. It's very rare that someone says something like that where I'm like, ooh, that stung. Most of the time it's much more of I get what you're doing. You're kind of reinforcing the standard patriarchal attack on women's appearances. And I will, we're blocking you anyway. So that's kind of the end of it. But the other aspect of it that is kind of curious is the sense of vulnerability that goes along with it. And that one has been a lot harder to process. I'm recognized on the street all the time now, no matter where I am. And, I've had situations where people have come up to me when I'm out in front of my house unloading my groceries, or in airports when I'm traveling for business. I have people come up to me when I'm out walking with my kids in a park. And that's bizarre, and most of the time everybody is really gracious and really kind. The thing that seems to happen more often than not is that people forget to introduce themselves to me because they feel like they know me. And I always have to say, what's your name? And thank you for your support. And I try to be very gracious about it. But the aspect of, maintaining privacy and wanting the experience of being able to kind of go about your day-to-day, especially with young children. My kids are 5 and 4, and not feeling all the time like the bubble of anonymity that most of us function with is there for me most of the time anymore has been a really serious adjustment. And one, honestly, that I'm still processing. I have days where I want to kind of like be behind a gate, where like I don't have to worry about what, am I going to walk out of my house without my makeup on at 6:15 in the morning and to walk my dog and have somebody approach me, so that's been a really interesting aspect of the ride.
Well, I notice whenever any of my posts get shared by people who have a bigger platform, that I feel the vulnerability of someone outside of my intimate community coming to my page asking me, who the fuck are you?
That I will say is that I believe in transparency completely, and this is one of the things about, running a women's leadership company and already being like really well steeped in effective leadership is that I never saw a reason to hide anything that I had done in the past. And indeed, like at the moment where Resistance Live started to blow up and I started to get questions that were like, did you used to do some work with Ivanka Trump, like 2 years ago, 4 years ago? I immediately wrote a post about it and was like, yeah, I did. And we separated during the campaign because I no longer wanted to be affiliated with the family name. And there's more to the story. And at some point, if it's appropriate, I will tell it. But all you need to know right now is that we are obviously on the opposite sides of things and we no longer collaborate and we won't ever do it again. The thing that's interesting, though, is that when you grow this big, this fast, there's a lot of information that you've shared along the way that gets lost that other people don't know. And so I do feel compelled now and again to kind of remind people that I've been transparent about this from the beginning, that I have nothing to hide, and that, the story around it is what it is. And, for goodness sake, she thanked me in the acknowledgments of her book, even though I hadn't spoken to her at that point for like 2 years. Yeah. And I can't change any of that. And at the same time, it also doesn't impact my credibility.
Right.
And the flip side of that has to do with my credentials, because I do have people, like occasionally there'll be really snarky, trolly people. Again, very few and far between. I mean, we've been so rigorous about building this incredibly supportive community that when this happens, it's such an aberration that it's shocking. But there are people who are like, where did you get your law degree? Facebook? And I always have to say, no, look, here's my, and I wrote a very long post about this in December finally that was like, fine, you all want my bona fides? Like, here they are. Like, I've been an activist since I was 15 years old. I have a triple major from Carnegie Mellon. I graduated at the top of my class from law school. I was the president of the moot court board. I litigated cases on behalf of some of the largest institutions in the world, and human rights cases that involve some of the most massive human rights violations against women that have ever been experienced. Lifelong feminist, all that other sort of good stuff. And usually when I do that, that kind of shuts people up for a while. but inevitably I have to repeat it. And, I think that, It's just interesting that, there's always, and I find this particularly much more significant with women who are at the forefront of this movement of resistance than it is with men. You can be a guy who used to trade Bitcoin and they want your opinion and, it's valuable, as opposed to, those of us who are lawyers, or Amy Siskind, who was a principal at Morgan Stanley, having to constantly justify why our voices should matter, or where we got our knowledge and why it's more than just opinion, and that's an interesting aspect of, I think, where every woman in leadership finds herself these days. Ours is just sort of under much more of a microscope.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I love about your broadcasts that I think sets you apart from a lot of the other commentators on what's going on right now with the Trump administration is that you infuse so much hope into your broadcasts, and that lifts me up because it can be so uninspiring when you read the news. And then I go and I listen and I read your stuff and I'm like, okay, there's hope. And so how do you personally maintain that hope in the face of such terror that's coming out of this current administration?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I will say some of it is about knowledge. And that's one of the reasons why I feel so committed to this broadcast. It's why I do it 5 days a week, because being a lawyer and having practiced in Washington, D.C., and having litigated in federal court and done the kind of really high profile legal work that I did before I started my company, I really have a profound understanding of how things work on the Hill and how things work in federal investigations and how subpoenas work and, what legal strategy looks like. And so some of my comfort and optimism honestly comes from understanding the process and also having faith in the rule of law. I think that it would be a different story for me if I didn't understand how these aspects of our government really work on a very deep level. And also if I didn't have faith that the judicial branch is still doing its job. So that's one aspect of it. And that's one of the reasons why, a lot of people don't know this, but I did teach for 2 years at Columbia Law School. And part of the aspect of having been, someone in front of a classroom teaching people about the law is that I'm really committed to putting everything into layperson's language so that the people who are listening understand what I understand about the way our legal system works. And so that's a kind of unique skill that I do bring to it that I think adds to the optimism that goes with it. Because I think when you understand things, it's easier to have a sense of control, right? Yeah. But the flip side of it is that, in the work that I do now in leadership and my many, many years now as an executive coach, I truly do believe that things happen for a reason. And even though none of us would wish this administration on our worst enemies, like ever, for any reason, and I know we would all go back and change it if we could, I have an awful lot of hope in the awakened activism of people who have never been activists before, and also in the force of the voices of women right now at this moment in history. And so the combined aspect of having a lot of faith in what's happening in the Mueller investigation and that the rule of law will triumph with the blue wave and the Women's March and the new things that we see coming out of that, like hundreds of first-time female candidates running for office, and the force of organization that has never existed to this degree before amongst cross-state efforts to flip seats. I just have a lot of hope in the process of it. And so all of that kind of combines. And then I'll just add that for me, I'm like everybody else, right? I have days where, and I've certainly called up, some of my besties and been like, what if all of it falls apart? Right. Or I'll talk to other lawyers because I have a very small cadre of lawyer friends, some of whom we team watch Rachel Maddow together some nights and are talking to each other on the back end over Facebook Messenger. Where we'll say what if this really is the end of American democracy? Then what? And usually there's someone in there, even when I'm in that state, who's saying to me, no, wait a minute, remember, checks and balances, 3 different branches of government, one of which is still functional, the other of which has Robert Mueller and the Department of Justice in it under not Jeff Sessions. So let's have a little bit of hope about that. And remember that it's not over till it's over, right? And so that's part of it too, is that I don't want to mislead anyone that I'm constantly in a state of hope, because nobody is. But at the same time, I'm really grounded in the knowledge of how it works. And also, when I'm not feeling that way, I'm the first person to reach out for help.
Yeah, I think that that's the most important thing, is that we have that group of people who can remind us when we're not when we forget. We have people who remind us. Yeah. And so I'm curious, and this is actually one of the big things that I would love to chat with you about, is that you do have such hope and faith in our rule of law. And yet I also know so many people who think that that's completely naive, right? Because the rule of law have let down huge groups of people in the history of our country for so long. And, an example of this would be the ERA, that was never passed, that was never ratified because of women, but also because our law system failed women. And so I'm curious, how do you juggle those two? Because I feel like it's so important to have hope. And also, it can be so hard to have hope when we haven't seen our government have our backs for so long. And this is just, of course, speaking as women, not speaking of race and gender.
Right, exactly. I mean, I think that we're on an arc of progress, and it may not feel that way. It may feel like everything is being kind of rolled back, but I am a very big believer in that famous Martin Luther King quote that the arc of justice is long. The arc of I'm gonna totally butcher it now. The arc of moral justice is long, but bends toward justice. The arc of moral sovereignty. I'll have to look it up. But it is the idea that inevitably the long arc bends toward justice if we put the right degree of pressure on it. And that seems to be, to me, a part of the story. So, the ERA didn't pass because the states we didn't have enough states legislatures to vote in favor of it. But we've seen huge progress in the law on the federal level and state by state in terms of anti-discrimination provisions since that time. The ERA, I get asked quite a bit if the ERA is going to come back anytime soon. And I was actually asked about this very recently at one of our live speaking events. And what I said was, it might, but I think the bigger picture of what we have to focus on now is getting Trump out of office. And then we can talk about the ERA, that priorities have to be set. The flip side of it is that for those of us who believe that the law can be a force for justice, we're usually lawyers who also understand that, like, the Constitution was designed to be a flexible, living, breathing document. Justice Scalia thought that the Constitution should just be what it was, right? But over the course of our history as a country, all sorts of things have been interpreted into the Constitution that weren't even in the minds of our forefathers when it was written. Like the right to privacy, for instance, which certainly is not contained in the document itself. And so the other thing, that I just have to consider here when I look at all of this is that we're so far from a perfect union. We weren't at the start, and we certainly are not anywhere near it now. But progress continues to be made, and advocates, whether they're lawyers or activists, make a huge difference on that front. And so I believe in education, and I believe in progress when it's possible. And I certainly don't have any reason to think that, like, that arc of progress will not continue in the law. I know there's a lot of fear about stacking the bench right now, but what I've said to people is only a handful of Trump's nominees have actually gotten through. And keep in mind that we have people on the bench who were nominated, like, going all the way back to Carter and Ford. And that, that judges who are unethical or immoral or who break the law can be removed from the bench. So let's have focus on the fact that, legal training actually indoctrinates us that we're supposed to follow precedent, and that expansions of the law have to be written into the context of that precedent, but that we understand that there is flexibility and fluidity to meet the times. And even conservative lawyers who I know are obviously trained in the same way. They might have slightly narrower interpretive principles, but everybody gets that that's sort of one of the founding principles of our jurisprudence. So.
Yeah. And the way I see your work, really, Elizabeth, is, we have to have people that are outside the system who are trying to dismantle the system. And then we also have to have people that are in the system, that know how the system works, that can begin to reshape the system from the inside out. And I feel like that's why your lives inspire me, is because you're the model of, this is how it works. Let's make sure that it's being used in the way it's supposed to be used.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And I actually see myself, I kind of ride that line, because I certainly am an activist in my own right. Like I spoke at the Me Too rally in New York, and I've been at the women's marches, and I've been protesting since I was a teenager. And, I'm all in favor of, peaceful civil disobedience. Absolutely. But I will also say that, change from the inside out, particularly in our institutions, is really necessary. And I think people who don't have an understanding of how some of these institutions work don't understand the leverage that actually exists within them to cause change. And so while we're certainly in dangerous times right now, and I don't want to discount the fact that having, the House and the Senate and the presidency under the control of the GOP, which appears to have some serious corruption issues as a party right now, isn't dangerous. There's also precautions written into our system of government that are designed to protect the democracy. And so the invocation of those by the right kinds of advocates like Robert Mueller or, Sally Yates, of course she was fired, but, she certainly tried, are examples of the fact that efforts can still be made within the boundaries of our legal system that are designed to correct what's happening right now.
Yeah, I hear that. And, I feel like you're kind of making politics cool again.
Well, I think resistance makes politics cool again. And I think
that's true.
I'll just, from where I sit, I've never not been a political wonk. So, if it was geeky before and it's cool now, so much the better. But, it's always been the same for me. I grew up in a very political family. So, so in any event, I think that there is a really interesting phenomenon happening right now of many people who have not felt able to use their voices before using them now. And that kind of new empowerment feels really good. And feels really important and feels like it's changing history because it is. And so if that's what cool is in politics.
Well, I'm curious what your viewpoint, how you respond with people who say, well, politics is just negative and what you focus on grows. So you shouldn't focus on, what's broken in the system. You should focus on love and light.
So here's a really interesting thing. I've had a yoga practice like my whole life. And I spent a number of years where I was, in a yoga studio here in New York City that I went to like 6 days a week. And there were plenty of people in that community as a spiritual community who were like, it's all love and light. And, it's all the secret and it's all manifestation. And if we focus on anything negative, then it's just going to replicate itself. I happen to believe that that's spiritual bypassing, frankly. Yeah. And that's a phenomenon that exists in a lot of spiritual communities where the idea that you might have to deal with the reality of your life, for instance, makes you a lesser spiritual being than if you're only focused on love and light. And I also happen to believe that that's a path to using your privilege to escape things that other people have to suffer with. So for me, I am largely an optimist, as we've already kind of established, but I'll also add that I think that there is there's a ferocity that's needed right now in terms of activism and using our voices that love and light just simply can't touch. I will say that Julia Butterfly Hill has this amazing quote about love. Hopefully I won't butcher this one too. That's about the fact that love has teeth. It has claws and teeth. And like the love that is powerful and structured and defensible will change the world. And that's my kind of love, right? It's the kind of love that says like all of us are entitled to equality and equity. All of us are entitled to our voices. There is no arbitrary hierarchy of human beings, no matter what our culture has taught us. And that the defense of that requires action. So I'm not in the game of, just trying to kind of like reach enlightenment. And as one of my teachers used to say, like sit on the top of a mountain and then what happens? We all go out for beer. I'm really a believer that there's progress in action. And also that you can't be a spiritually enlightened being if you're allowing other people to suffer because it's easier for you to say it's all love and light.
Yeah. Oh, oof. Yes. Yeah. And I think that, one of the missing conversations in the spiritual community is absolutely the conversation of privilege. I don't ever see that conversation being taken place at yoga studios. And yet the people who tend to go to yoga studios who can afford, $30 classes are people with tremendous privilege. And it's so frustrating that they're not the ones that are talking about it, considering they're the ones that have the most of it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I agree. And I mean, I think there's a lot of eye-opening that's happening in a lot of communities right now around all of this. But I mean, I completely agree with you. And all the many, many years that I was steeped in the yoga community, explicit conversations about privilege never happened. There might have been conversations about the caste system in India, but there weren't conversations about, the privilege of, largely white women to sit in yoga studios and listen to teachers and bow and kiss their feet and not be out there advocating for social and political justice. So you can tell where I fall on that front. Don't get me wrong. I love my yoga practice and I love my friends who are teachers, but I also am very much of the bent that not using your voice and your body for action when it's necessary in defense of other people is indefensible. Frankly.
Yeah. So it's really cool because seeing your platform, grow to the extent that it has as quickly as it has, also knowing that you're taking care of 2 little ones and that you're running a business, what had to shift, at least maybe not externally, because maybe externally it would be just systems for support, but also internally in the transition from, okay, I have a small platform, I have a big business, to I have a big business, I have a bigger platform, and I'm taking care of 2 little ones and a puppy.
Yeah, the puppy didn't arrive until June, but it's a lot. And, what I will say about it is that it has been a bit of an education in my own capacity. I feel really lucky in some ways that I spent the years that I spent practicing in one of the nation's largest and oldest big law firms, because I got used to, for instance, working through the night on things that required a lot of intellectual focus, or being able to process huge volumes of information in a very short time period, because that was what my job required. Certainly, and this is one of the things I said at the end of 2017, I worked harder in 2017 than I ever did at anything ever in my life. And that's after many, many years of like serious profile work. And so, there's not a moment any longer, except when I'm sleeping, where I'm really totally off the clock. And that's been, save when I will say I do carve out, a couple of hours every night to be with my kids, dinner, homework, that kind of, putting them to sleep, all that sort of stuff. But it's a lot. And I also feel like I for whatever reason, I seem to have a larger capacity to tolerate it than a lot of people do. I don't know why. Maybe it's the legal training. Maybe it's that my mind is really quick. Maybe it's just that I've always been in politics and I get it, and it's not a burden for me. But it's not simple, and there are certainly days where I'm like, okay, it would be really nice to just run away from the broadcast for a couple of days and take a break. But even when I'm on vacation or I'm traveling with my kids to see their grandma, I'm very mindful of, how much other people rely on me to get through this time right now. And so it's a labor of love, and, I don't resent it in any way, shape, or form, but it has stretched me, kind of to the max, not to the breaking point. Because that's the other thing. It's like, I'm very, very mindful of the fact that in this role that I'm in right now, there's a sort of conduit quality to it. And if I don't take care of myself, I can't continue to play that role. So in some ways, I'm actually healthier than I've been in a really long time, because I'm just so mindful of taking care of myself physically. But all that said, I don't want to joke around that it's like, it's easy, and I will say that I'm awake in the middle of the night a lot, like churning about stuff and figuring it out and thinking through what's really going on behind the scenes, perhaps, and strategically what I think might happen next. So, but I don't think that's unusual. I think there's a lot of us who haven't slept very well since the 2016 election. And I don't expect that that's going to change until Trump is out of office. So
it's commendable at how you're able to show up and talk about very serious things on a consistent basis. Thousands of people are watching you. They're waiting for you. If you're even 5 minutes late, people are like, hello, where are you? What's going on? Like, we need you.
And, the crazy thing is, of course, I'm doing the broadcast in the middle of like an otherwise crazy work day.
Right.
So most days I'm doing client work, corporate work, 6, 7, 8 hours a day. And then I'm cramming the broadcast somewhere in the middle. So, that's in and of itself an interesting phenomenon of flipping back and forth to being this sort of like corporate consultant, leadership coach, trainer, and, political wonk. And
traveling.
And traveling. Yeah. Because I do a lot of travel for the business. But, it's an interesting balance. And the thing that's starting to happen now, which I'm kind of excited about for 2018 is that actually the two things have started to integrate a little bit. So, I spoke at Google, for instance, in December, and that speaking invitation came in through a regular follower of Resistance Live. And we just signed a new engagement with one of the nation's largest health insurance providers, and that came in through a follower of Resistance Live. For a while there, when this whole thing was taking off, I had my investment banking and my finance and my tech clients on one side, and there was a debate inside the company of like, what's going to happen when these people find out that you're out there, doing these broadcasts every day. And I was kind of like, I don't know. We'll figure it out when it happens, which drives my staff a little crazy, but I tend to be like a quick start visionary and they're used to it, but it's kind of where I fly. And now that it's sort of integrating, it's actually really nice because it doesn't feel like there's two sides of me operating at the same time. It's integrated, and at certain moments it's more of a political focus. At certain moments it's more of a leadership focus. And those two things are integrated anyway, right? All politics. Yeah. So
that's what I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's a question that I had for you. I took your leadership program, and one of the questions that I asked was, are you ever concerned about alienating your clientele because of your very loud political conversations online? But I'm curious, how you navigated that. The need to be speaking up about this while it may not necessarily be quote unquote on brand, right? And then how that's led you into then not even questioning it anymore and just knowing that this is what you have to do.
Yeah, I'll say it's been an interesting ride because there were a couple of edgy moments, where, and to be frank about it, even in the work that we did before Resistance Live went wild, because our work is so focused on women's leadership, the corporate clients that we tended to attract, even for gender neutral leadership trainings, tended to be corporations that were looking to be more progressive. So, whether that meant like we need to shift our leadership strategy or we need to have, more emotional intelligence in leadership, those were the kinds of qualities that were often discussed. But there were a couple edgy moments where, otherwise conservative organizations, names that you would recognize, were kind of like, whoa, like what's happening over here when they found out about it. And nonetheless, as far as I know, we haven't lost any business as a result of it. And also I'll just say that the degree of engagement that we have in the community of followers on Resistance Live is so significant and so loyal and dedicated to preserving the goodness of that community that when it started to take off, it wasn't like there was any option, right? Yeah. I mean, to me, it felt like I had gotten on a train and the train was moving and there wasn't much that I could do to stop it. And I certainly didn't want to leap off when it was going 100 miles an hour. And my option was to trust that there was a destination in mind that was going to end up being good for everyone involved. My COO did have a conversation with me when it started to go a little crazy, where she was like, I don't know about this. And I said, thank you, first of all, because she's always up for challenging me and I need people around me who would do that. And then I said, I am not going to stop doing this because I feel compelled to do it. I feel like it's societally important. It's politically important. But I also think that there's a reason why all of this is happening.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, it has turned out to be true, as I said, because all of this has really started to integrate for us. Mm-hmm. And it's also raised new questions in terms of, what does women's leadership look like in this era? How do we act in ways that are honorable and dignified and in integrity when we've got somebody leading our country who isn't? And so it's opened up, new opportunities for us too that I didn't expect. And again, I like you, I'm not doing any of this. And I've said this repeatedly. I mean, we did that broadcast for free for the first 10 months. We were hemorrhaging money on it. Like my COO was like, we're paying people to do work that isn't in their job description. We're supporting people to answer questions about politics when we're like a consulting company. Like, right. What are we doing here? And then we set up Patreon and we've been able to get subscribers, like, even $2 a month just to help to support that effort. But I just had to like trust and lean into it, that there was a reason and a purpose. And, the other thing is if you're someone like me who has been, really on a women's leadership bent for quite some time and a self-identified feminist and always been politically active and aware, quitting was never an option. The only question was going to be, what would that mean for us as a business? And like I said at the start, it really has helped us to make some choices. We've had to make some hard ones. And shifted a lot of content programming and the like. But at the same time, my sense about it is that when you're doing right and you're doing good, you don't stop to worry about when you're going to get paid for that. You know, I mean, we all have to pay our rent, but you know, I just had sort of an intuitive sense that it was all going to be okay, and that as long as I was on the right side of justice, I wasn't going to have to worry about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And so, okay, if somebody is listening to this and they're wanting to start to speak up towards things that are more uncomfortable and start using their voice in a greater capacity, but they're concerned about what are people going to think about them? What are their family going to think about them? You know, what advice or what words of wisdom do you have to offer them?
Yeah, I mean, you know, those internal voices are often much louder than the ears of people out there in the world. And it's certainly true that if you've got, you know, those kind of limiting beliefs, as we like to describe them, about the fact that people aren't going to like me if I do this, or I'm going to lose family members if I do this, those are things to kind of work on. I certainly, and I don't want to discount this, there are members of our community who no longer speak to sisters or brothers or mothers or fathers because of their support of Trump. And I've worked people through that, even in, you know, executive coaching scenarios, very traumatic folks. And at the same time, you know, I think that the option to not speak out right now is also a form of privilege, frankly. Because, you know, if we have a choice about whether or not we're going to come to the defense of other people because we ourselves have not been targeted yet, that's something that we also ought to be considering on an internal level.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I think that if it's about a fear of being able to make a difference, though, which is something that people do ask me about, and when we did this live speaking tour we did last summer and fall, I got this question a lot, like, who am I to do this? You know, like, can I really make a difference? What I say to people is, like, I'm just one person. You know, sure, I have a kind of unique nexus of experience and education that allowed me, for whatever reason, to pull in a following very unexpectedly and unpredictably, and, you know, in all that those other ways. But I'm just one person who turned on a Facebook Live and started talking, you know. And if I can do that, if I can be in a position now, like, we're close to 50,000 followers now. We've got 20,000 followers on Twitter. You know, the whole platform itself. There are days where I broadcast where there's 100,000 people watching me by the 24 hours is up.
Oh my gosh, Elizabeth, that's insane.
It's insane. And like, it all started with me just deciding that I had something to offer, and a few other people saying, like, we need to see you talk about this.
Yeah.
And that's what it became. So if I can do that, you know, anybody else can, fundamentally. I mean, my view on this is that we all have our gifts and we're all here for a purpose and a reason. And if your gift is making art that is resistance art, go do that. If your gift is making music, go make music that supports the resistance and supports the values that we all want to live into. You know, if you can podcast and do broadcasts about intersectionality and racism, like, do that, you know. But I think the thing that that we feel compelled to do in life is often an invitation from the universe to step fully into what we're supposed to be doing, and you shouldn't ignore those urges, right? Yeah. I personally feel like I'm more on my purpose in the world than I've ever been before doing this work. But, you know, I did not predict nor ask for any of this, and yet here it is. All I did was accept an invitation.
So what do you think is next for you? I mean, I'm envisioning media. I'm envisioning a show on MSNBC. I mean, I have big dreams for you.
There's a lot of suggestions out there for me. And, you know, this is one of the great things about the unknown, right? Like, I don't know what's coming up next for me. I will say that we had an instance in our business about 2 years ago where we tipped in the direction of being much bigger and working for much bigger engagements than we had done before in a major way. Like, we had a year where we kind of basically tripled our revenue. That was a small taste of what it feels like right now to be sitting on the precipice of this. You know, there's definitely a book in my future. I'm working with a publisher, a book agent, and there are publishers who are already interested, who are actually chasing me for a book right now. So that's very unique and unusual, and that's definitely going to happen. It's just a question of when. I have to find bandwidth to write, you know, but it's definitely on the horizon. And, you know, as far as media goes, you know, I have a show right now. This is what I kind of say to everybody. Like, Resistance Live in its way is its own show.
Absolutely.
So, you know, anything that comes along in terms of invitations, of course, I'm going to entertain. But I'll also just add that I feel like the speaking engagements that I'm being invited to do right now, which are coming in more and more and more, and they're coming in more and more from corporate, which is really interesting, are very appealing to me, because the idea of being able to talk to people in traditional masculine environments about what activist women's leadership looks like and what it can do to be a force for good in the world, and what it can do when the kinds of principles that we believe in terms of new paradigm women's leadership are applied to very powerful corporations out there in the world, and actually perhaps turn some of those corporations in a direction of service. The difference that can make to me is massive.
Yeah.
In addition to the kind of individual work that all of us are doing politically and as a movement, as a resistance right now. So the public speaking is really fascinating. But, I think all of these things come together, and I'm very much enjoying the process of being a public voice on all of this.
A badass? No.
Yeah, no. Yes, I'm enjoying being a badass. But I will also say that, like, intellectually and emotionally for me, like, this role is fun. And so, to take that in whatever direction makes the most sense now is really nice. And, I look at people, my icons have always been people like Gloria Steinem, right? Angela Davis, people who have taken activist roles and become voices for others and been lifelong advocates and, been on the cutting edge of pushing society forward. And I'd be honored to do a small fraction of what those women have done to change the world. So that's the trajectory that I'm happy to be on. And whatever opportunities come my way, I'm going to consider, like, I'm always going to open the door and look at what's on the other side before deciding whether or not to walk through it.
I think you're a really unique, well, maybe not unique, but a very visual example of the idea that the universe is conspiring in pushing us towards our zone of genius. We just have to be strong enough and bold enough to listen.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And I'll tell you, it's not without its like fits and starts,
Absolutely.
To me, there are moments where some of the invitations that have come my way that I knew I had to say yes to, but were intimidating. The first time I walked into a CNN studio, that's kind of an interesting thing where, you're going to be like live on, multinational television stations all over the world. And yet, what you find is that as long as you can enter experiences like that with an understanding that you deserve to be there, that inherently the qualities that you bring to the table as a human being, one of my favorite teachings from yoga that I still hang on to is that we already all have everything that we need. If you can step into those big invitations with that kind of an ethos in your presentation, then it's very quick before it becomes comfortable, right? Yeah. And sometimes I do have moments where I'm like, I can't believe 100,000 people watched me today. And then at the same time, I'm like, yeah, and I can't change that. So that's just the way that it is.
Right.
I get used to it in a weird sort of way.
Yeah. So I have one last question, and it's super practical. Do you think that we'll be able to remove Trump from office before the 2020 election?
I think there's a solid chance that some combination of Robert Mueller and the 2018 election can do it. Yeah. And I actually, I think, I'm loath to make predictions and speculate on the broadcast. I really try to just stay completely grounded in fact. But where we are right now in the Mueller investigation promises to have some breaking points even before November. And we don't know how the dominoes are going to break on that. I would not be surprised if he's not the president by the end of this year.
That's my wish. But then I read so many articles of people saying that there's no way that they would be able to remove him by the end of the year. So
yeah, I think that one of the things to keep in mind just about like the way we all process news is that opinions are opinions, right?
Absolutely.
And the law, while there are certain things about the law that are written in stone, lawyers have opinions, which is why we litigate things, right? You go to court, you argue one side, and then you argue the other. And sometimes it's about what the law can do. I think that the bigger question here is not so much about procedure, but about political and public pressure. Because that's the moment where people will jump ship, particularly if Mueller comes out with evidence that's damning, that, the entire executive
RNC.
And the RNC are compromised by the Russians. That may be the moment where we see it all come crashing down. So, I don't see a way that he makes it to 2020. I maybe I'll be wrong, but I don't see it. Yeah. So that's
I want to believe that. So we're just gonna ride on that hope. And,
all right, that works for me.
And get the whole RNC out while we're at it. Awesome, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. Any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Just the final thought that I like to say to everyone, which is don't forget your voice matters. The democracy was built to represent all of us, and the people on the Hill work for us. And so your voice is just as important as mine or anyone else's. And now more than ever, you need to use it.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.